What if the most important person you ever met was someone everyone else ignored? In the gleaming lobby of one of the world's most luxurious hotels, a silent elderly Japanese man was seen as a nuisance, a problem to be managed. The staff mocked his strange requests. The manager wanted him gone. But one waitress, a young woman haunted by her past and drowning in debt, saw something different. She saw a story. When she finally spoke the 3 words in Japanese that no one else could understand, she didn't just break the silence. She unlocked a secret that would shatter her world and expose the billion-dollar lie hidden in plain sight. The Grand Elysian Hotel wasn't just a building, it was a statement. A monument of polished marble, shimmering crystal, and hushed ambition located in the heart of downtown Chicago. It catered to the kind of wealth that didn't need to announce itself. It simply existed, expecting flawless service as a law of nature. For the staff, this meant a state of perpetual high-stress performance. Every smile had to be genuine, every crease in a uniform, a cardinal sin. Clara Mitchell knew the performance better than anyone. At 26, she felt more like a ghost in a crisp black and white uniform than a person. Each day was a grueling ballet of balancing trays, memorizing wine pairings, and forcing a serene smile while her mind raced with the numbers that were slowly suffocating her. Her father's mounting medical bills, the overdue rent on her tiny apartment, the student loans that felt like a life sentence. The Grand Elysian was a gilded cage, and she was just one of the canaries singing for her supper. The man in Suite 1201 arrived on a Tuesday. There was no fanfare, no fleet of black cars, no entourage. He was just there. An elderly man, impeccably dressed in a simple but clearly expensive charcoal suit. He was Japanese, his face a roadmap of dignified wrinkles, his posture ramrod straight. He checked in under the name Mr. Watanabe. The problems began immediately. Mr. Watanabe did not speak a word of English, not a single solitary word. He communicated through a series of small, polite bows and gestures that no one on the front desk staff could decipher. He carried no smartphone, no translation app, just a small leather-bound notebook in which he occasionally wrote. The concierge, a polyglot who prided himself on speaking 5 languages, tried Spanish, French, German, even a few phrases of Mandarin. Mr. Watanabe simply offered a serene, uncomprehending smile and a slight bow. Within 24 hours he became the problem in 1201. The hotel manager, a man named Arthur Davies, was a vessel of corporate anxiety. He was sleek, ambitious, and utterly terrified of anything that might disrupt the hotel's 5-star rating. Mr. Watanabe was a disruption of the highest order. He just points at things on the room service menu, Davies complained, pacing in the staff briefing room. We brought him the filet mignon 3 times yesterday. 3. Then he just shook his head and waved it away. The waste is astronomical. Someone find out what he wants. The staff's patience wore thin. Whispers followed Mr. Watanabe through the lobby. He would spend hours in the hotel's grand library, not reading but simply observing. He would sit by the ornate fountain in the atrium, watching the flow of water with an unnerving stillness. His silence was his defining feature, and in a place that ran on communication, it was an irritant. The staff from the bellhops to the senior management began to treat him with a thinly veiled condescension. He was the eccentric old man, the wealthy tourist, who was too stubborn or too senile to learn the language. Clara watched it all unfold with a growing sense of unease. She saw the eye rolls when he tried to mime a request. She heard the exasperated sighs from the room service staff. They saw a problem. Clara, for reasons she couldn't quite explain, saw a person. There was an intelligence in his eyes, a watchfulness that suggested his silence was a choice, not a limitation. He wasn't confused. He was observing. Her connection to his world was a deeply personal one, a phantom limb of her past. Her late mother, Dr. Eleanor Mitchell, had been a renowned professor of East Asian studies, specializing in Japanese cultural history. Clara's childhood hadn't been filled with cartoons, but with stories of samurai, the art of the tea ceremony, and the subtle beauty of haiku. Her mother had insisted she learn Japanese not as a chore, but as a bridge to understanding a different way of thinking. The language was woven into the fabric of her fondest memories, the sound of her mother's voice, patiently correcting her pronunciation. After her mother's death and her father's subsequent illness, that part of her life had been sealed away. Speaking Japanese was like looking at an old photograph of a loved one. It brought a sharp, sweet pain she preferred to avoid. It belonged to a life of academic promise and financial security that had vanished, replaced by the relentless reality of her present. On the third day of Mr. Watanabe's stay, the simmering frustration in the hotel boiled over. It started as most things did, with a simple request. Mr. Watanabe was in the hotel's Michelin-starred restaurant Aria for breakfast. He had tried through a series of delicate gestures to explain something to his server, a young man named Kevin, who was already flustered from a busy morning. Tea. He wants tea, Kevin said, sighing to his colleague, Jessica, Clara's perpetual rival. Jessica was sharp, competitive, and viewed kindness as a professional liability. Well, give him the Earl Grey, for heaven's sake, she snipped, gliding past with a tray of mimosas. They brought him Earl Grey. Mr. Watanabe looked at the cup, then at the server, and gave a slow, deliberate shake of his head. They brought him English breakfast. Another shake. Chamomile green oolong. Each time the same polite refusal. Mr. Davies was summoned. His face was a mask of strained hospitality. Sir, he said, speaking slowly and loudly, as if the guest were deaf rather than non-English speaking. Tea. We have many types. Please. Point. Mr. Watanabe opened his small notebook and wrote a few characters. He showed it to Davies. The manager stared at it, as if it were an alien scripture. He shoved it at Kevin, who shoved it at Jessica. No one had a clue. This is absurd. Davies muttered, his composure cracking. He's doing this on purpose. The entire restaurant staff was now focused on the silent tableau at table 7. The air was thick with embarrassment and irritation. Clara was clearing a nearby table, her back to the scene, but she could feel the tension like a static charge. She heard the crisp sound of Mr. Watanabe setting his cup back on its saucer. And then she heard him speak. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the murmuring of the dining room. It was a single, perfectly enunciated phrase in Japanese. Clara froze. The tray in her hands felt suddenly weightless. The words were not just familiar. They were specific, precise, and achingly reminiscent of conversations with her mother. He wasn't just asking for tea. He was asking for a very specific, high-grade roasted green tea prepared at a very specific temperature. Jessica scoffed. It's just gibberish. He's probably forgotten where he is. Something inside Clara snapped. It was the casual disrespect, the willful ignorance. It was an insult not just to the man, but to the memory of her mother and the beautiful, complex world she had shared with her. She set her tray down on a nearby service station. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. Every instinct screamed at her to stay invisible, to not draw attention, to keep her head down and survive the shift. But her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Language is a key, Clara. It doesn't just open doors, it opens people. She turned, straightened her apron, and walked towards table 7. Davies saw her approaching and shot her a look of pure fury. Mitchell, what do you think you're doing? He hissed. Clara didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on Mr. Watanabe. He looked up at her, his expression unreadable but his gaze piercing. She took a breath, bowed slightly from the waist as her mother had taught her, and spoke. Her voice was clear, steady, and the Japanese words felt both foreign and perfectly natural on her tongue. "Forgive the staff's confusion, sir," she said in Japanese. "Would you care for hojicha, brewed at 80 degrees Celsius?" The silence that followed was absolute. Kevin's jaw dropped. Jessica's eyes widened in disbelief. Arthur Davies looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. Mr. Watanabe's face, for the first time since he had arrived, changed. The serene mask fell away, replaced by a look of profound, utter astonishment. A slow, genuine smile spread across his lips. He looked directly at Clara, his eyes twinkling with a sudden, intense light. And then he replied. The world seemed to shrink to the space between Clara and the old man. The clatter of cutlery, the low hum of conversation from other tables, the furious glare of her manager, it all faded into a distant buzz. All that existed was the quiet, resonant Japanese flowing between them. "You understand, Mr. Watanabe," said his voice, a low, smooth baritone, laced with surprise, and something else. Relief. "Yes, that is precisely what I would like." "Thank you." Clara bowed again, a flush creeping up her neck. "It is my pleasure, sir. I apologize for the delay." She turned to the stunned staff. Switching back to English, her voice was clipped and professional. "I need a pot of hojicha. The loose-leaf kind from the presidential suite pantry, not the bags. And a thermometer. The water must be 80 degrees Celsius, no hotter. And bring the Kenji-style teapot, the small ceramic one." Kevin stared at her, dumbfounded. You speak Japanese. Just get the tea, please," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. As the staff scrambled to fulfill an order, they suddenly understood. Davies pulled Clara aside, his fingers gripping her arm. His face was a mixture of anger and bewilderment. "What was that, Mitchell?" he whispered harshly. "You speak Japanese. Why was that not on your employee file? Do you have any idea how much embarrassment you could have saved us?" "You never asked," Clara replied coolly, pulling her arm away. "And with all due respect, Mr. Davies, the problem wasn't a language barrier, it was a listening barrier." She walked back to the table, leaving her manager sputtering. The dynamic had shifted. She was no longer just a waitress. She was a bridge, an essential piece of the puzzle that had vexed the entire hotel for 3 days. When the proper tea was brought, Clara prepared it herself at the table, her movements precise and graceful, an echo of the countless times she had watched her mother perform the same ritual. She poured the pale amber liquid into his cup. Mr. Watanabe watched her every move, his eyes missing nothing. He took a sip. He closed his eyes for a moment, savoring it. "Perfect," he murmured in Japanese. "Just like my grandfather used to make." He gestured to the chair opposite him. "Please, sit." A waitress sitting with a guest was a cardinal sin at the Grand Elysian. Out of the corner of her eye, Clara could see Davies frantically gesturing for her to refuse. She ignored him. She sat. "You speak with the Tokyo dialect, but with a slight academic inflection." He observed his gaze, sharp and analytical. "You did not grow up there." "No, sir," Clara replied in Japanese. "My mother was a professor. She taught me." "She taught you well," he said. "It is a rare skill. Especially here." He gestured vaguely at the opulent room, in a place of such noise. For the next hour, as the breakfast service wound down around them, they talked. He asked her about her mother, about her studies, about the books she liked to read. He spoke of Kyoto gardens, of the art of pottery, of the changing seasons. He never once mentioned business wealth or the reason for his visit. It felt less like an interrogation and more like a conversation between old friends. He was thoughtful, witty, and possessed a deep, calming presence. Clara found herself relaxing for the first time in years, the crushing weight of her life momentarily lifted. She was no longer Clara, the waitress. She was Eleanor Mitchell's daughter, speaking the language of her heart. The rest of the hotel staff watched from a distance, their expressions a cocktail of resentment and awe. Jessica, in particular, looked on with a venomous envy. She saw her own ambitions being thwarted by the quiet, unassuming girl she had always dismissed. Clara had found the key to the most difficult guest in the hotel's history, and in doing so, had made herself indispensable. For the rest of the day, a new protocol was established. All communications with Suite 1201 were to go through Clara. Davies, swallowing his pride, reassigned her. She was no longer serving tables. She was the personal liaison to Mr. Watanabe. The requests that followed were esoteric and specific. He wanted a particular type of ink pen and rice paper delivered to his room. He asked for a recording of a specific koto player from the 1970s. He requested books on pre-industrial architecture. Each time he would ask Clara, and she, drawing on the deep well of knowledge her mother had given her, would understand. She knew the difference between Sumi ink and regular ink. She recognized the musician's name. She was not just translating his words. She was understanding his context. That evening he called for her. When she arrived at his suite, a sprawling space with panoramic views of the city, he was sitting not in the luxurious living area, but on a simple cushion on the floor, practicing calligraphy on the rice paper she had procured. "Your manager, Mr. Davies," he began, not looking up from his work. "He believes I am a wealthy, eccentric old man. A nuisance to be placated until my credit card clears." Clara remained silent, unsure how to respond. "The servers believe I am senile. The concierge believes I am rude." He continued, his brush moving with fluid precision. He painted a character, the one for truth or sincerity. "Tell me, Clara, what do you believe?" The question hung in the air. This was a test. Her answer mattered more than procuring the right kind of tea. She thought about his observant eyes, his patience, the way he listened more than he spoke. "I believe you are looking for something," she said finally, her voice soft but sure. "And I don't think you've found it yet." He stopped painting. He placed his brush down carefully and looked up at her. The polite, grandfatherly facade was gone. In its place was the sharp, penetrating gaze of a man who missed nothing. It was the look of a hawk, and for a fleeting second it made her shiver. "Tell me," he said, his voice dropping to a serious, almost conspiratorial tone. "There is a story my grandfather told me. 2 fishermen go to the same river. One has a large new net. He casts it wide and catches 100 fish. He sells them all immediately at the market for 1 coin each. He goes home happy with 100 coins. He paused, holding her gaze. "The second fisherman has an old net full of holes. He spends all morning mending the holes. He only has time to cast his net once in the afternoon. He catches only 10 fish, but these are the large fat fish from the deep part of the river. He takes them to the finest restaurant in the city and sells them for 20 coins each. He goes home with 200 coins. He leaned forward slightly. Which fisherman is wiser? Clara knew this wasn't about fishing. It was a business parable, a test of her values. The obvious answer was the second fisherman, the one who made more money. But she sensed a trap. She thought about her mother, who valued knowledge over profit, and her father, a carpenter who valued craftsmanship over speed. They both have a type of wisdom, she began carefully. The first fisherman understands volume and speed. He feeds many. The second understands quality and value. He earns more. but true wisdom. She hesitated, then found her conviction. True wisdom might be in the fisherman who teaches the village how to mend their nets and find the deep part of the river so everyone can eat well. Mr. Watanabe's face remained impassive for a long moment. He stared at her, his dark eyes searching hers. Clara's heart pounded. Had she said the wrong thing? Had she failed the test? Then slowly, he broke into a wide, brilliant smile. He picked up his brush and on a clean sheet of paper painted a single elegant stroke. He then stood up, walked to the door and held it open for her. "You may go," he said, his voice once again mild and grandfatherly. "Thank you for your time, Clara. You have been most helpful." As she walked down the silent carpeted hallway, Clara felt a strange mix of exhilaration and dread. She had stepped through a door into a world she didn't understand. She had the key, but she had no idea what kind of lock she was turning, and she was beginning to suspect that Mr. Watanabe was not who he appeared to be at all. The next morning everything changed. A sleek black town car with tinted windows pulled up to the Grand Elysian's private entrance. A woman stepped out. She was in her late 40s with severe dark hair, pulled into a tight chignon, and a bespoke suit that probably cost more than Clara's car. Her name was Evelyn Reed, and her presence radiated an aura of quiet, absolute authority. She was not a guest. She was an executive. She went directly to Arthur Davies's office, and though the door was closed, the ripples of her arrival spread through the hotel instantly. 10 minutes later, Clara was summoned. She found Davies standing behind his desk, looking pale and flustered. Evelyn Reed was seated in the visitor's chair, her posture perfectly erect. She held a tablet in her lap and didn't look up when Clara entered. Mitchell Davies began, his voice strained. "This is Miss Reed. She is an associate of Mr. Watanabe. She will be overseeing his needs from now on. You will report to her as well as to me." Evelyn Reed finally looked up. Her eyes were a pale, icy blue. "You are the translator," she said. It wasn't a question. I speak Japanese." "Yes," Clara stammered. "We are aware Ms. Reed said, her voice devoid of warmth. Mr. Watanabe has been impressed with your resourcefulness. Your official role has been modified. You are now his exclusive special liaison. Your duties will extend beyond tea and calligraphy paper. You will facilitate all his communications. You will be compensated for the additional responsibilities." She named a figure for a weekly stipend that was more than Clara's monthly salary. Clara was stunned into silence. "You will also sign this," Ms. Reed continued, sliding a thick document across the desk. "It is a non-disclosure agreement. What you see, what you hear, what you translate, none of it leaves the confines of your work with Mr. Watanabe. The penalties for breach are significant." Clara numbly signed the document, her mind reeling. This was far beyond an eccentric tourist. This was corporate. This was serious. Her new life began that afternoon. Mr. Watanabe's suite was transformed into a command center. Encrypted laptops, satellite phones, and video conferencing equipment were installed by a discreet tech team. Clara's job was to be Mr. Watanabe's voice and ears to the English-speaking world. The first call was with a team of architects in London. Mr. Watanabe sat in his armchair, listening intently while Clara sat beside him, a headset on translating in real time. He would listen to a full minute of English, his eyes closed, as if meditating, then open them and deliver a precise, detailed response in Japanese for Clara to relay. He was discussing structural engineering, load-bearing capacities, and aesthetic philosophies with the expertise of a master builder. Clara, struggling to keep up with the technical jargon, was mesmerized. The next call was with a lawyer in Zurich, discussing complex financial instruments and asset transfers. Then, a video conference with a board of directors in New York, where Mr. Watanabe, through Clara, calmly but ruthlessly dismantled their quarterly report, pointing out inefficiencies and missed opportunities they had completely overlooked. Clara was witnessing the operations of a vast hidden empire. Mr. Watanabe was not just a wealthy man. He was a titan, a puppeteer pulling strings across the globe from a hotel suite in Chicago, all while hiding behind the mask of a frail, non-English speaking old man. In their quiet moments, he would revert to the gentle scholar she had first met. He would ask her about her father's condition, listening with genuine empathy. One afternoon, he noticed her rubbing her temples. "You are tired, Clara," he said in Japanese. "This is demanding work." "It's okay," she replied. "It's just a lot to process." "Tell me about your father," he prompted gently. "You work so hard for him." Hesitantly, she opened up. She told him about her father David, a master carpenter who had taught her the value of hard work and integrity, how a sudden aggressive form of Parkinson's had stolen his ability to work, leaving him needing round-the-clock care that their insurance barely covered. She confessed her fear of losing him, her guilt over not being able to provide more. Mr. Watanabe listened without interruption. When she finished, there was a long silence. "Your father sounds like a man of great character," he said softly. "He built things that last, a worthy legacy." His eyes held a strange sadness. "My own son, he prefers to tear things down." It was the first truly personal detail he had ever revealed a crack in his carefully constructed persona. The mention of a son who was a disappointment humanized him, and Clara felt a surge of sympathy. She was beginning to feel a fierce loyalty to this enigmatic man. He was demanding, yes, but he was also wise, and she believed kind. But as the days turned into a week, tiny inconsistencies began to surface, like threads pulling loose from a perfect tapestry. During a tense negotiation with a German automotive company, the CEO on the other end of the line made a joke about American football. Mr. Watanabe let out a short, sharp laugh, a split second before Clara had finished translating the joke. It was a minuscule, almost imperceptible slip, but it snagged in her mind. How could he have understood? Another time, while reviewing a contract, he pointed to a clause, and in Japanese told her it was a real curveball. The term, a direct translation from American baseball slang, was highly unusual for a native Japanese speaker of his generation. They would have used a different, more traditional idiom. The most jarring incident happened during a video call with a tech startup in Silicon Valley. The young CEO was brash and arrogant. Halfway through, in a moment of frustration, the CEO muttered under his breath, "This old fossil doesn't get it." He said it quietly away from the microphone. It was barely audible. Clara didn't translate it. It was rude and irrelevant. But she saw Mr. Watanabe's eyes narrow for a fraction of a second, a flicker of cold anger. Later after the call, he instructed her to draft a message terminating their interest in the company. Why, Clara asked, surprised. "Their technology is promising. Their character is flawed," he replied in Japanese. "A man who disrespects his elders in private will one day disrespect his partners in public." He couldn't have heard it. The audio was too low. He couldn't have understood it. It was in English. Unless... The thought was so outlandish, so impossible that she immediately dismissed it. It had to be a coincidence. She was tired, overworked, reading too much into things. He was her benefactor, the man who had lifted her out of her desperate situation. To doubt him felt like a betrayal. One evening, Evelyn Reed found Clara in the hotel's business center, researching a point of Japanese corporate law for Mr. Watanabe. "You're doing good work, Mitchell Ms. Reed," said her tone as crisp as ever. It was the closest she had ever come to a compliment. "Thank you," Clara said. "He trusts you." That is not an easy thing to earn. She paused, studying Clara's face. Don't mistake his quiet nature for weakness. There is no one more ruthless or more brilliant than him when it comes to his work. He is always several steps ahead of everyone in the room. I'm starting to realize that Clara admitted. "Just keep doing your job," Evelyn said, her gaze intense. "Translate what he says. Do not editorialize. Do not offer your own opinions unless asked. Just be his voice. The less you try to understand the why, the better it will be for you." The warning was clear. Don't get curious. Don't dig deeper. But it was too late. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Who was Mr. Watanabe? Why was this vast, powerful empire being run by a man pretending he couldn't speak the most common business language in the world? What was the purpose of this elaborate, bizarre charade? Clara felt like she was standing at the edge of a precipice, looking down into a fog. She had thought she was the key, but she was beginning to fear she was just another piece in a game whose rules she couldn't begin to comprehend. And the man she was helping was no longer a kind, elderly scholar. He was a shadow, and she was willingly letting herself be pulled into the darkness. The grand finale of Mr. Watanabe's Chicago operations was a proposed merger with a major American technology firm, Sterling Moss. Their CEO, a notoriously aggressive corporate raider named Robert Sterling, was exactly the kind of man Mr. Watanabe professed to dislike, loud, flashy, and dismissive. Yet this deal was clearly the centerpiece of his entire trip. The negotiations had been conducted remotely for weeks with Clara as the linguistic conduit. Now Sterling and his team were coming to the Grand Elysian for the final face-to-face meeting to sign the papers. The hotel was abuzz. Arthur Davies was a nervous wreck, polishing already gleaming surfaces and barking at his staff. This meeting, he knew, was the big one, the culmination of his mysterious guest's stay. The night before the meeting, Mr. Watanabe seemed more pensive than usual. He had dismissed Evelyn Reed early and asked Clara to stay for a final review of the documents. The suite was quiet, except for the rustle of paper. "You are troubled, Clara," he said, not looking up from a spreadsheet. "I'm just anxious about tomorrow," she lied. He put the papers down and looked at her, his gaze unsettlingly perceptive. That is not the truth. Clara's heart skipped a beat. She decided to take a small risk to test one of the threads that had been bothering her. "So she began in Japanese when we spoke to the German automotive company. You laughed at the football joke before I translated it." The silence in the room became heavy. Mr. Watanabe's expression didn't change, but a stillness came over him, the stillness of a predator that has just noticed the trap. "My hearing is not as poor as my English," he replied smoothly. "I recognized the tone of a joke. I was laughing in anticipation of your translation." The explanation was plausible. Too plausible. It was the kind of answer someone who was used to covering their tracks would give. Clara felt a chill despite the warmth of the room, and the term curveball she pressed gently. It's a very American phrase. He smiled a disarming grandfatherly smile. "I have had many American associates over the years. One picks up certain phrases, even if one cannot string them together in a sentence. You are very observant. It is a fine quality." He had an answer for everything. He was a fortress, and she was just tapping at the outer walls. She let it drop, but the suspicion now burned brighter than ever. The next day, the Sterling Moss team arrived. Robert Sterling was a caricature of a powerful CEO, tall, broad-shouldered, with a booming voice and a handshake that was more of a power play than a greeting. He and his two vice presidents, a man and a woman, who mirrored his arrogant demeanor, were shown into the hotel's most opulent conference room. Mr. Watanabe entered a few moments later, leaning lightly on a simple wooden cane Clara had never seen before. He looked frail, smaller than usual, the very picture of an aging foreign patriarch. Clara walked beside him, her notepad and pen in hand. Evelyn Reed followed a silent, imposing shadow. Davies fussed over the arrangements. "Mr. Sterling, a pleasure to have you. Can we get you anything?" "Coffee, water." Sterling waved him away dismissively. "Let's just get this done." He turned his attention to Mr. Watanabe and spoke in the slow, loud manner people use for the hard of hearing. "Welcome. I am Robert Sterling, happy to finally meet." Mr. Watanabe simply bowed. Clara translated the greeting. The meeting began. Sterling dominated the conversation, his voice filling the room as he laid out his final, slightly revised terms. They were aggressive. A lower valuation for Watanabe's assets, a more dominant role for Sterling Moss executives in the new merged entity. He was treating this as a conquest, not a partnership. Clara translated faithfully her voice, a calm, neutral counterpoint to Sterling's bluster. She could feel the tension radiating from Evelyn Reed, who sat perfectly still, her hands clasped on the table. Mr. Watanabe listened, his face a serene, unreadable mask. When Sterling finished, there was a heavy silence. All eyes turned to Mr. Watanabe, waiting for the response that would come through his young translator. He looked down at the table for a long moment. Clara leaned in, ready to hear his Japanese reply. He took a slow breath. He placed his hands flat on the polished mahogany of the table, and then he looked up straight into Robert Sterling's eyes. When he spoke, the voice that came out was not the quiet, heavily accented Japanese she knew. It was a clear, resonant, and powerful voice, speaking perfect, unaccented American English. "Mr. Sterling," he said, the sound shocking everyone in the room into absolute stillness. "Your revised terms are not only unacceptable, they are insulting. And your assumption that my inability to speak your language equates to an inability to understand your greed is frankly laughable." The silence that followed was deafening. Robert Sterling's jaw literally dropped. His VPs stared their faces, frozen in disbelief. Arthur Davies, who had been lingering by the door, looked like he might faint. Clara felt the floor drop out from beneath her. Her mind went completely blank. Every conversation, every shared confidence, every moment of perceived connection, it all flashed before her eyes, now cast in a terrifying new light. It had all been a lie, a performance. And she had been the unwitting centerpiece of the entire deception. The man who called himself Watanabe slowly pushed his chair back and rose to his feet. He no longer looked frail or old. He stood tall, his presence suddenly immense, filling the room with an authority that dwarfed Robert Sterling's loud aggression. The cane lay forgotten by his chair. "My name," he announced, his voice cold and hard, "as steel is not Watanabe. It is Silas Thorne." The name landed like a bomb. Silas Thorne, the reclusive genius CEO of Thorne Industries, one of the largest and most innovative private technology corporations in the world. A man who hadn't been photographed in over a decade. A legend in the business world, rumored to be eccentric, ruthless, and brilliant in equal measure. A man who was most definitely not Japanese. This is impossible," Sterling stammered, his face ashen. "Is it?" Thorne replied, a ghost of a smile playing on his lips. "You saw an easy mark. An old foreigner you could bully and cheat. You didn't see a partner. You saw a victim. And that is why this deal is off. Evelyn, please escort these gentlemen out." Evelyn Reed stood, her expression grimly satisfied. This way, Mr. Sterling. The Sterling Moss team, utterly humiliated and broken, shuffled out of the room without another word. Clara remained frozen in her chair, staring at the man who was not Watanabe. He turned his gaze to her. The warm, grandfatherly eyes were gone. They were now the eyes of Silas Thorne, sharp, calculating, and utterly unreadable. "Clara," he said, and hearing her name in his true voice was the most disorienting thing of all. "I believe you and I have a great deal to discuss." Her heart hammered in her chest. She had been more than just a translator. She had been a tool, a pawn in a billion-dollar game of corporate chess played by a master she had never even seen. And she had no idea what his next move was going to be. The conference room, once a stage for a high-stakes corporate drama, was now silent, save for the frantic beating of Clara's own heart. Silas Thorne, the name still felt alien, walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked out at the Chicago skyline. His posture, his silhouette, everything about him was different. The gentle stoop was gone, replaced by the confident stance of a man accustomed to owning everything he surveyed. "I owe you an explanation." He said, his back still to her. His English was that of an educated, well-traveled American, smooth and precise. Clara found her voice, though it came out as a strained whisper. "You lied to me." "I did," he said, turning to face her. There was no apology in his tone, only a statement of fact. "Every word I spoke to you in Japanese was part of a carefully constructed narrative. The stories of my grandfather, my disappointing son. They were fabrications designed for a single purpose. To what she asked, a surge of anger cutting through her shock. To make a fool of me, to use me to humiliate Robert Sterling. Sterling was an afterthought, a useful idiot, but not the primary target," Thorne said, walking slowly towards the table. He moved with a vigor that belied the elderly persona he had worn so well. "The entire exercise from the moment I checked into this hotel was a test. I call it a Socratic filter. I create a problem in this case, a high-value guest, who is completely incomprehensible, and I watch how people react. It tells me more about their character than any resume or interview ever could." He stopped in front of her. "The staff at this hotel. They failed spectacularly. They saw a problem to be ignored, a nuisance to be managed. Your manager, Mr. Davies, saw a threat to his hotel's rating and a potential cash cow to be placated. They were all transactional, superficial." He leaned forward, his hands on the table, his gaze intense. "But you were different. You didn't see a problem. You saw a person. You didn't hear gibberish. You listened for meaning. Even before you knew I was a person of influence, you showed empathy. That was the first gate." Clara stared at him, trying to process the sheer scale of the manipulation. The tea, the story about the fisherman, our conversations about my father. All data points he confirmed without a hint of remorse. The Hojicha tea was a test of specific knowledge and attention to detail. The fisherman parable was a test of your values to see if you understood the difference between short-term profit and long-term sustainable growth. Your answer about teaching the village to mend their nets was unexpected and brilliant. And my father, Clara's voice, trembled with rage. Was his illness just another data point for you? Did you enjoy listening to me bare my soul? My fears all so you could check a box on your psychological profile. For the first time, a flicker of something other than cold calculation crossed Thorne's face. It might have been regret. That he said quietly was a part of the test I did not anticipate. Your genuine decency and love for your family. I will admit your stories about him. They were a stark reminder of what this was all about. Integrity, craftsmanship, building things that last, qualities that are nearly extinct in my world. He straightened up. Clara, I didn't come to Chicago to buy Robert Sterling's company. I came here to find a person. For the last 5 years, my company has been developing a new initiative, the Thorne Foundation. It's a philanthropic endeavor with an endowment of several $billion. Its mission is to fund projects that bridge cultural and linguistic divides, educational programs, technological aids, preservation of disappearing languages. It is the legacy I want to leave behind. More important than any microchip or algorithm my company has ever designed. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. But a foundation of that scale cannot be run by the same sharks who run my corporation. It needs a leader with a different skill set. Not ruthlessness, but empathy. Not a head for numbers, but a heart for people. Someone who understands that communication is more than just language. It's about respect, context, and a genuine desire to understand. I have been searching for that person for 2 years. I've interviewed academics, diplomats, non-profit executives. They were all qualified. None of them were right. He looked directly at her, and Clara finally understood where this was all leading. The realization was so immense, so reality-bending that she felt dizzy. So I designed this test, he continued, this absurdly elaborate, expensive, and deceptive scenario. I hypothesized that the person I was looking for wouldn't be in a boardroom. They would be someone in the real world, someone with the right skills and the right heart who had been overlooked. I had my research team identify individuals in major cities with backgrounds in linguistics and cultural studies who were currently underemployed. Your name was on a list of 17 people in Chicago. Her entire life felt like a fraud. Had he known about her from the very beginning, the moment you spoke to me in that restaurant, Thorne said the moment you chose compassion over protocol, you became the primary candidate. Everything since then has been a confirmation of my hypothesis. You handled pressure. You navigated complex technical and financial information. You showed loyalty and discretion. You felt empathy for a lie, yes. But your empathy was real. That cannot be faked. The anger was still there, a hot coal in her chest, but it was now competing with a bewildering sense of awe. He hadn't just lied to her. He had built an entire world around her to see how she would navigate it. What do you want from me? She finally asked. I'm not offering you a job as my translator. Clara Silas Thorne said, his voice ringing with conviction. I am offering you a position on the board of the Thorne Foundation, and I want you to head its new global cultural initiative. I want you to take the philosophy you articulated in your answer to the fisherman riddle and apply it on a global scale. I want you to teach the world how to mend its nets. He named a salary that made the room spin. He spoke of resources that could change lives of opportunities, to build a legacy that would honor her mother's memory in a way she had never dreamed possible. It was everything she could ever want, a solution to all her problems and a fulfillment of her deepest held values. It was also born from the most profound deception she had ever experienced. She looked at Silas Thorne, the brilliant, manipulative, ruthless, and perhaps visionary architect of her past 2 weeks. He hadn't just offered her a job. He had dismantled her reality and was now offering to help her build a new one. I need to think, she said, her voice barely a whisper. The weight of the choice before her was crushing. Could she work for a man she wasn't sure she could ever trust? Could she afford not to? Clara left the conference room in a daze. The hallway moments before a familiar workspace now felt like a foreign country. She saw Jessica and Kevin, huddled by a service station, whispering furiously. They fell silent as she approached, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and awe. The entire hotel was electric with the gossip. The crazy old Japanese man was Silas Thorne, and the quiet waitress Clara was at the center of it all. She walked right past them, needing air. She found herself in the hotel's deserted library, the same room where she had first watched Mr. Watanabe sit in quiet contemplation. The memory felt like a lifetime ago. She sank into a leather armchair, her mind a maelstrom of conflicting emotions. Betrayal was the sharpest. Thorne had played with her emotions, her history, her financial desperation. He had used her mother's memory as a tool for his test. He had dissected her character like a scientist studying a lab rat. The cold, clinical nature of it was horrifying. But beneath the betrayal was a spark of something else validation. For years she had felt invisible. Her skills, the passion for language and culture her mother had instilled in her, were useless in a world that only cared about what table she was serving. Silas Thorne, for all his deception, had seen her. He had seen her value when no one else had, not even herself. And the offer, it was a lifeline of impossible proportions. It wasn't just about the money, though the thought of paying off her father's medical bills and ensuring his comfort was a relief so profound it brought tears to her eyes. It was about the purpose. To lead an initiative that did exactly what her mother had dedicated her life to, fostering cross-cultural understanding. It was a chance to make her mother proud, to turn the pain of her loss into a powerful positive force in the world. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from her father's caregiver. David had a good morning, was telling me stories about your mum and her trip to Japan again. He misses her. The message cut through the noise in her head. This was what mattered. Her father, her mother's legacy. She was startled by a knock on the library door. Arthur Davies entered his face, pale and slick with sweat. He looked like a man who had seen his career flash before his eyes and then promptly burst into flames. "Mitchell, Clara," he said, his voice oozing a desperate, unfamiliar familiarity. I just wanted to congratulate you. We are all tremendously proud. I always knew you had great potential. The hypocrisy was so blatant it was almost comical. This was the man who had reprimanded her, belittled her, and saw her as nothing more than a cog in his machine. "Did you, Mr. Davies, Clara?" asked her voice, flat. "Yes, of course, and I hope in your new capacity you'll remember the team here at the Grand Elysian. We'd be honored to host any future events for the Thorne Foundation." He was already lobbying her. She saw him then as Silas Thorne, saw him superficial, transactional, completely devoid of substance. He wasn't a bad man, just a hollow one. "Thank you, Mr. Davies," she said, standing up. "I have to go." She walked away, leaving him standing amidst the silent books, a relic of a life she was about to leave behind. She knew what she had to do. Trusting Silas Thorne would be a constant challenge. He was a manipulator, a grandmaster of human chess. But he was also offering her a chance to be a queen, not a pawn. He had tested her character, and in a strange way had revealed his own. He was ruthless, yes, but for a purpose she could believe in. He wanted to build something that lasted, just like her father. She took the elevator back up to the penthouse floor. She found Thorne not in the suite, but in the hallway, in quiet conversation with Evelyn Reed. They stopped when they saw her. Clara walked straight up to him. She met his gaze without flinching. "I have conditions," she said, her voice clear and strong. Thorne raised an eyebrow, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. Evelyn looked on, impassive. First, Clara said, "You will never lie to me again. We will operate with complete transparency. If I am to help you build bridges around the world, I will not do it from a foundation of deception." "Agreed," Thorne said without hesitation. Second, The foundation will establish a special grant for elder care, specifically for families of skilled laborers who have lost their ability to work. We will call it the David Mitchell Grant. A slow, genuine smile spread across Silas Thorne's face. It was the same smile she had seen when she first spoke to him in Japanese, but this time it felt real. A brilliant addition to our portfolio, Miss Mitchell. Agreed. And third, she said, taking a deep breath, I want you to come with me to meet my father. I want you to sit with him as Silas Thorne and listen to his stories. I want you to see the man whose integrity you claim to admire. This gave him pause. The world's most reclusive billionaire making a personal visit to a retired carpenter in a modest suburban home. It was a test of her own. He looked at her for a long moment, the brilliant strategist assessing a new, unexpected move. Then he nodded. I would be honored, he said. When do we leave? In that moment, Clara knew she had made the right choice. She was no longer a victim of his game. She was a player, and she was ready to write her own rules. 2 weeks later, Clara stood in the doorway of her father's small, quiet house. Silas Thorne was beside her, not as a billionaire, but as a guest holding a thoughtfully wrapped gift. Inside her father, David sat in his favorite armchair, the tremors from his illness making a handshake impossible. It's a pleasure to meet you, sir, David said warmly. Clara's told me you're her new boss. I'm her new partner, Thorne corrected gently, and I've heard a great deal about you. For the next hour, Clara watched as the reclusive genius sat in rapt attention, listening to her father speak of the integrity of his craft. He didn't test or analyze. He simply learned, absorbing the quiet wisdom of a man who had built his life on honesty and hard work. As they left, Thorne turned to David. Your daughter spoke of a wise fisherman, he said with genuine sincerity. But the wisest man is the one who teaches his child to build a strong foundation. Thank you. In the car, Clara asked about the gift. A first-edition book on traditional Japanese woodworking, Thorne explained. I thought he would appreciate the pictures. It was a gesture of pure empathy proof that he was capable of the understanding she had demanded. The following Monday, Clara walked through the gleaming front doors of the Thorne Industries skyscraper. Her name was on the directory, Clara Mitchell, Director, Global Cultural Initiative. Her new office had a view that stretched to the horizon, a world of possibilities laid out before her. On her desk sat a single object, the small ceramic teapot from the hotel. Beside it was a note, a reminder that the most important conversations often begin with a simple offer of understanding. Welcome, Clara. Let's get to work. St. She smiled. The journey had been a labyrinth of deception, but it had led her here. She understood Silas Thorne's language, now a complex lexicon of tests and strategies. He had seen her value when no one else had, and now she was no longer a pawn in his game. She was a player ready to make her own moves. With her mother's legacy as her guide, and her father's integrity as her foundation, she was ready to teach the world how to mend its nets. And so Clara's story reminds us that the most extraordinary opportunities can be hidden in the most ordinary of circumstances. It wasn't her ability to speak a foreign language that changed her life. It was her willingness to listen with her heart. In a world that so often judges people by their title, their wealth, or the language they speak, she chose to see the person behind the silence. Her journey from a struggling waitress to a global leader wasn't about luck. It was about character. It begs the question, who in our own lives are we overlooking? What incredible potential are we failing to see because we're not truly listening? If this story resonated with you, please give this video a like. It truly helps our channel grow. Share it with someone who you think needs to hear it. And most importantly, subscribe and click the notification bell so you don't miss our next story. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever had an experience where a simple act of kindness or understanding led to something completely unexpected?